I'm Claire Whitman, 36 years old, and on the night of my mother's 65th birthday, I stood in the kitchen of our family home, placing the last swirl of vanilla frosting on a 3-tier cake I'd spent the whole day preparing. The living room was full of neighbors and cousins, sipping wine over plastic plates of appetizers. My hands smelled like lemon zest and powdered sugar. When I carried that cake out to the table expecting a smile from my father, instead, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Claire, you're a burden. We want to live without you." My mother didn't flinch. She just nodded and turned back to her wine and Angela. My sister lifted her glass like it was a toast, not a gut punch. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever had to stand tall while someone tried to tear you down, I didn't say a word. That night, I set the cake down, walked past my aunt's shocked face, and let the cold air swallow me as I stepped outside. That was the last time I stood in that house as their daughter. But to understand why those words cut so deep, you have to know the years that led to them. I was born and raised in Boise, just a few miles from downtown, in the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on. My parents weren't wealthy, but they were proud. They taught us that family came first, that you showed up with your sleeves rolled up, and you did what needed to be done. I believed in that so much that when I turned 28, I opened a little bakery with my savings and named it after my grandmother who taught me to knead dough by hand. Sweet Heritage opened its doors on a Tuesday morning with cinnamon rolls in the window and a line of neighbors around the block. I poured everything I had into that shop, every spare dollar, every weekend, every holiday. By the time I was 34, I had 5 employees and a loyal stream of customers who came for my pecan braid and stayed for the warmth. But all of that changed. The winter mom got sick. It started with chest pain and ended in heart surgery, followed by months of recovery and a pile of medical bills. My dad's pension barely covered the basics, and the mortgage was slipping out from under them. So when they called me late one night, their voices strained and full of worry. I didn't think twice I sold Sweet Heritage for $90,000. I paid off the hospital bills and brought the mortgage current. I packed up my apartment and moved back into my old bedroom to save on rent and started working at a chain bakery for $15 an hour. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept things steady. I paid their electric bill, their water, their mortgage. I cooked dinner most nights after long shifts and fixed whatever broke because I believed that's what family did. But Angela never saw it that way. She'd always been the one with charm, the one Mom liked to show off. Her boutique had never really taken off, but she talked about it like she was one deal away from Fashion Week, and when I moved back, she started calling me a squatter under her breath like I was a guest in my own parents' home. I ignored it at first, told myself she was stressed, but it got worse. She'd borrow money and not pay it back. She'd roll her eyes when I mentioned a new recipe, and once when I brought home a batch of scones to test, she laughed and said, "Nobody cares what a grocery store cashier is baking these days." Still, I stayed. I kept the lights on for all of them until the night Mom's birthday party turned into something else entirely. It should have been a celebration, the kind of night where the good silver came out and old friends told stories. But instead, it became the night they told me to my face that I was no longer wanted. What I didn't know, yet standing there in that cold front yard, was that walking out would be the first step towards something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine in years, my own life, that night after the party. I checked into a quiet motel off Overland Road. The room was small with an old heater clicking in the corner and a lamp that buzzed when I turned it on. I lay on the bed in my work clothes shoes still on, staring at the ceiling as if it might answer something. My phone sat silent beside me. No messages, no calls. Just the dull ache of everything I'd given and how little it seemed to matter. 3 years earlier, I was still running Sweet Heritage. Mornings started before dawn, filling the shop with the scent of cinnamon and browned butter. I'd built that place from scratch, paid for the permits, designed the logo, hired staff who became family. The floors creaked near the back ovens, the front window caught just the right light in the morning, and folks from all over the city lined up for my lemon-glazed muffins. It wasn't just a job. It was mine, and I'd planned to keep it for the rest of my life. Then Mom got sick. At first we thought it was just fatigue, but a month later she was in surgery and the bills started piling up. Nearly $60,000 in medical debt, plus a $100,000 mortgage still hanging over the house. One night I got a call from Dad. He never asked for anything before that. His voice was low, like he didn't want to wake something in the house. "Claire," he said, "we're in trouble." I sold the bakery that same month. $90,000 cash, no financing. I paid off the hospital in full and brought the mortgage current. Then I packed up my little apartment and moved back home to help however I could. I took a job across town at a chain bakery, a far cry from owning my own place. They paid $15 an hour. My apron had someone else's name stitched on it, and every time I clocked in, it felt like another reminder of what I'd lost. Still, I sent $2,000 to my parents every month. I'd set it up automatically so I wouldn't forget. On top of that, I did the grocery runs, cooked dinner, kept the bathrooms clean, even changed the water heater filter when it gave out last winter. Nobody asked. I just did it, because that's what I thought love looked like, quiet, steady, showing up even when it cost you everything. Angela never chipped in. She still lived nearby, but spent most of her time online trying to relaunch her boutique, posting grainy pictures of handbags and thrifted jackets under the name Angela's Attic. She used my old bedroom for storage, boxes of unsold inventory stacked against the closet door, and whenever she was around, her tone was clipped, cold. One night I heard her in the kitchen after I'd gone to bed. She was on the phone, and I could hear her voice through the vent. "Claire's freeloading," she said, laughing. "She's just waiting around for Mom and Dad to hand her the house." I stayed quiet the next morning, made coffee, and left before anyone else was awake. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, like she believed them. A few weeks later, she asked me for money again. "Just $500 this time," she said, brushing it off with a smile. "I've got a supplier waiting on fabric." She never paid me back. Not that time or the time after that, when she needed $1,000 for branding help. I stopped asking. At dinner, if I mentioned something from work, a new frosting technique, a seasonal croissant, she'd roll her eyes and say, "You don't even run a bakery anymore." Mom would stay quiet, chewing her food like nothing had happened. Dad would change the subject. And I'd sit there finishing my meal in silence, trying not to let it show. After long shifts at the chain bakery, I'd come home to Angela sprawled on the couch, shoes off, scrolling her phone. One time she didn't even look up. "This isn't your personal hotel," she said. I just set my bag down and went to my room. I kept thinking back to when we were little, riding bikes through the neighborhood, trading ice cream flavors on the curb. She wanted to be a designer back then. Said she'd have her own line by 25. I wanted to run a kitchen. I guess I got there first, but it never felt like a race. Angela borrowed more than just money. She took my time, my space, my peace, and every time I let it slide, hoping she'd come around. I kept sending the $2,000, kept paying the bills, kept fixing what broke, and they let me. Not once did anyone pull me aside to say thank you. Not once did they tell her to stop. That birthday party wasn't just a moment. It was a message. They had watched me empty myself for them, then called me a burden. The words sat heavy in my chest long after I left. Back in the motel, I pulled up my laptop and logged into my bank account. My hand hovered over the recurring payment settings. 3 years of automatic deposits, electricity, water mortgage, every month without fail. I canceled all of them. There was a pause as the screen refreshed, and when it was done, I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt lighter, like I'd set something down I didn't know I was carrying. The next morning, I packed my things and drove to Nina's place. We'd been friends since college, met in a writing class neither of us wanted to take, and stuck ever since. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom near Elm Grove Park. Her furniture never matched, and her floors creaked like mine used to, but there was always fresh coffee on and room on the couch. She poured us both a cup, sat across from me, and listened as I told her what had happened. From the day I sold the bakery to the moment Dad said those words. She didn't interrupt. She didn't tell me what to do. She just listened, then said softly, "You don't owe them the rest of your life." Later that week at work, Marcus noticed I was quieter than usual. He was stacking trays of rolls when he asked if I was okay. I told him everything, maybe not all at once, but enough for him to understand. He didn't give me a lecture. He just nodded and said, "They don't get to do that to you. Not after everything you gave up." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it, like he meant it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone saw the truth of what had happened. Not the story my parents told, not the version Angela whispered to neighbors, but what actually was. That night, I sat on Nina's porch and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. I knew the calls would come, the bills would pile up, the silence wouldn't last. But I also knew this. I wasn't going back. A full week passed after I canceled the payments. No one called, no texts, no emails. I checked my phone more than I care to admit, even though I told myself I didn't expect anything. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I guess I thought maybe they'd notice the shift, or at least check if I was okay. But the silence just stretched. I imagined the house dark and still, refrigerator humming until it didn't water running, until it stopped the heat dipping low once the utility notices came and went. I stayed at Nina's those first few days. Her apartment felt like a small refuge with the sound of the heater rattling and the warm smell of hazelnut coffee every morning. I'd wake up early, try to stay quiet as she got ready for work, then head into the bakery for my shift. Same apron, same pace, but something felt different. Not better, just unanchored. 2 days later, my phone lit up around lunchtime. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it until it stopped ringing, then let it buzz through a second time. The third time I answered. His voice was short. "Claire, what's going on?" "The lights are out. The water's off. You need to get everything turned back on." I stood near the employee locker area, one hand against the cold metal shelf. He didn't ask where I was, didn't ask how I'd been, just straight to the point. I tried to speak, but he talked over me. "You can't just pull the plug like this. Fix it." I breathed out slowly. "Dad, I'm done paying for everything. You said I was a burden. You said you wanted to live without me. So now you are." There was a pause, just a second, and then he let out a sharp huff. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my fingers stiff. I didn't cry. I didn't call back. That evening, as I sat at Nina's dining table eating leftover stew, a text came through from Angela. No greeting, no context, just, "Wow, real nice, Claire, cutting us off like that. So selfish." I stared at it, read it twice, then typed out a reply. "You need to take care of yourselves now. I'm not your bank." I hit send and turned off my notifications. For the first time in years, the weight shifted. Not gone, but not mine anymore. Nina came home an hour later with a grocery bag and a new pair of tea mugs she found on sale. We sat together on the couch, the evening news humming in the background. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just poured tea and handed me a mug. "You're not their lifeline," she said gently. "Let them figure it out." That night, I lay awake listening to the faint hum of traffic outside her window. I thought about everything I'd done over the past 3 years. Every wire transfer, every shift I worked on aching feet. Every night I scrubbed pans and floors, then paid the mortgage on a house I no longer felt welcome in. I thought about Angela calling me a squatter, about Dad saying I was a burden, about Mom staying quiet through it all. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. 2 more days passed before I heard anything again. Dad didn't call. Mom didn't text. But Nina's neighbor, who worked over near the Hillcrest subdivision, told her something in passing. "You know that white ranch house on Meadowbrook," she'd said. "Power's out. No lights for over a week. Looks like no one's been in or out." Nina mentioned it casually that night while we cooked dinner. I didn't say much, just nodded and stirred the sauce on the stove. On Saturday, I swung by the grocery store for eggs. While I waited at checkout, I overheard two women near the self-checkout line, Alice and her friend, both neighbors from our old street. "I heard the Whitman house hasn't had power for over a week," Alice whispered, not knowing I was 2 aisles away. "Marjorie's been borrowing water from next door just to shower. It's a shame. Poor thing." I paid for my eggs and left quietly, my keys clenched tight in my hand. The gossip didn't surprise me. Alice had always been the neighborhood reporter. I knew how fast word would spread once the porch light stayed off too long. Back at Nina's, I stared out the window for a long time. I knew what that house looked like in the dark. I knew how much pride my parents had put into keeping up appearances. The hedges trimmed, the porch swept, the front window decorated just right during the holidays. And now the illusion was unraveling. Sunday came with drizzle and wind. I stayed inside, helped Nina grade papers, and cleaned up the kitchen. Just before dinner, the doorbell rang. Nina looked through the peephole, then opened the door slowly. Mom stood there on the mat, her coat soaked through, holding her purse like it might blow away. "I need to talk to Claire," she said, her voice quiet. I came to the door, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "What is it, Mom?" She stepped inside, hesitating. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back like she hadn't bothered with it much. "The house is falling apart," she said, her voice trembling. "There's no electricity, no water. We're borrowing from neighbors. Pamela's working at a gas station now, just until her boutique's back online." I didn't move. "You have to turn it back on," she said softly. "Just until we get back on our feet." I stood still, the dish towel clutched in one hand. "You called me a burden in front of everyone. You nodded when Dad said you wanted to live without me." Her eyes flicked away for a moment, then back. "We're struggling," she said. "Pamela's trying her best. She's ringing people up at a corner store for minimum wage. She's doing what she can." I didn't respond. She stepped a little closer. "You're still part of this family, Claire. We need you." I shook my head. "You made your choice at that party. You wanted to live without me. Now you do." Her expression shifted. The pleading turned sharp. "You're abandoning us," she said, her tone cooler now. I didn't flinch. "You abandoned me first." Nina came around the corner, her voice calm but firm. "I think it's time to go, Marjorie." Mom looked at me once more, her face unreadable, then turned and walked out without another word. Nina shut the door gently, then poured us each a cup of tea. We sat in the quiet for a while, the hum of her fridge filling the room. I hadn't expected that visit to hurt as much as it did, but it did. I thought about the years I spent saving their home, about every wire transfer that kept the lights on. Now the lights were off, and so was I. The guilt crept in sometimes, but then I'd hear Angela's voice calling me selfish, or Dad's silence after I told him I was done. They'd built their comfort on my sacrifice. Now that it was gone, they were finally feeling the cracks. A few days after Mom showed up at Nina's door, word about my family's situation started to spread beyond our block. Nina had overheard it at the corner store from a woman in line, someone who lived a few streets over. "The Whitman's place looks abandoned," she'd said. "No lights for weeks. Someone said they're borrowing water just to get by." That kind of news moved fast in our part of Boise, especially in neighborhoods where folks took pride in trimmed hedges and swept porches. It didn't take long for the whispers to find their way to the bakery where I worked. On a slow Thursday afternoon, I walked past the break room and caught Marcus and another cashier, Serena, talking by the coffee machine. They weren't trying to be cruel, they just didn't know I was there. Serena was shaking her head. "I heard Claire's parents haven't paid the mortgage in months. House might go up for sale." Marcus kept his voice lower. "Pamela's working late shifts now. Gas station on Fairview, I think." I stood still behind the bread rack, my hands resting on a tray of cooling rolls. My stomach turned not from shame, but from something else I couldn't quite name. That strange mix of sadness and detachment that happens when your world starts separating from itself. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Customers came and went. A few offered polite smiles. One of them, an older woman who used to special order lemon poppy seed bread from my old shop, didn't meet my eyes. I didn't blame her. I didn't blame any of them. That night I sat on Nina's porch and watched the sun dip behind the maple trees. The street was quiet. A few kids were riding bikes near the corner, their laughter soft and distant. Inside, Nina was grading papers. I hadn't told her what I'd heard at work yet. I didn't want to say it out loud. The next evening, while I was folding laundry on the couch, Pamela showed up. The knock was sharp, 3 fast hits loud enough that even Nina looked up from her book. She opened the door, halfway blocking the entrance with one arm. Pamela's voice cut through before she even stepped inside. "You're destroying us." I looked over my shoulder and stood up slowly. Pamela pushed past Nina, eyes fixed on me. She looked thinner, her makeup smudged, a jacket hanging off her like it didn't belong to her. "I'm working 12-hour shifts at a gas station," she snapped, "because you cut us off, because you couldn't handle a few unkind words." I didn't speak at first. I just looked at her. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing short. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to unload. I can't even update the shop website she went on. No internet, no sales, no brand deals. You killed everything I've built. I took a breath, steady and even. "You called me selfish," I said quietly. "You stood there while they called me a burden." You smirked. "You didn't say a word to stop it." Pamela scoffed, looking away for a second, then back again. "You owe us," she said louder now. "You think because you helped out for a few years that erases everything I stepped closer, calm but firm. I paid every utility bill, every mortgage payment, for 3 years, while you borrowed from me and never gave anything back. I gave up my business, my savings. You never said thank you, not once." She didn't respond. Her jaw tightened, her hands curled into fists at her sides. "Family doesn't lie about each other," I continued. "You posted about me in that community group like I was a stranger. You let people think I abandoned you. You wanted sympathy, not truth." Nina stepped in then, standing beside me. Her voice was even. "You need to leave now, Pamela." Pamela stared at me another moment like she had more to say but couldn't find the words. Then she turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a dull click. I sat down slowly, folding the towel that had slipped off the couch. Nina sat beside me, neither of us speaking at first. Then she handed me a glass of water and said, "You held your ground. That matters." I nodded, but the air felt heavier than it had before. The confrontation didn't fix anything. It just made the silence deeper. The days that followed were strange. I kept my head down at work, baked, cleaned, clocked out. A few coworkers were distant, but no one said anything to my face. The community group post Pamela had written lingered for a while, but eventually someone else posted about a missing dog, and the thread drifted down the page. The world kept moving even as I stood still. 2 weeks later, I drove past the old street. Just once. I didn't stop. I didn't turn into the driveway. But I saw the house. The windows were dark. The porch light was missing. A small paper taped to the front door flapped in the wind, something official. I couldn't read it from the road, but I didn't need to. The grass was overgrown. The blinds were crooked. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. The house where I grew up, the one I saved, was slipping away. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something quieter, like the last page of a chapter you don't plan to reread. Back at Nina's, I turned on the oven and started preparing dough for a new batch of scones. The apartment filled with warmth, the air sweet and familiar. I wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about saving anyone but myself. 3 months after I stopped the payments, I drove past the house again. It was the first time I'd been on Meadowbrook since everything fell apart. The lawn hadn't been mowed. The windows were dark. The blinds in the living room window hung crooked like they'd been tugged down and left that way. In the front yard, right near the edge of the driveway, stood a foreclosure sign. Weathered slanted the corner, peeling up from the wind. Beverly had heard from someone that the house sold at a loss. My parents didn't have the funds to hold on to it after the mortgage fell behind. No more barbecues on the back deck. No more porch lights turned on just for show. Now they were renting a small apartment on the edge of Boise, peeling paint, narrow lot, cracked sidewalks, all tucked behind a faded green laundromat. I didn't ask for the address. I didn't need to know. I pulled away from Meadowbrook without slowing down. By then, I'd been talking to Marcus more regularly, just after shifts or on lunch breaks. He'd asked what I planned to do next, and I didn't know how to answer at first. But one afternoon, he slid a folder across the prep table. Inside were printed forms loan information, a rough cost outline for leasing a retail space. "You've got the skill," he said. "You built one place already. You can do it again." I stared at the folder for a long moment, then tucked it into my purse. We started looking at spaces the next week. Nothing big, just something with enough room for ovens, a prep counter, and a small front area with windows that let in good light. One storefront in the north end felt right immediately. The walls needed paint, and the shelves were bare, but the bones were solid. I stood near the window with a measuring tape, picturing what it could become. Most evenings, I worked late at Nina's dining table, sketching layouts on a legal pad and researching mixers that wouldn't overheat in a small space. I rewrote my old recipes, tested new ones in her oven-adjusted measurements for small batches. There was no storefront sign yet, no flyers or menu boards, but the rhythm of building something again started to return quiet, slow, like muscle memory. Then one morning, as I was comparing prices on commercial refrigerators, my phone buzzed. The subject line of the email read, "I'm sorry." I hesitated. It was from Pamela. Her message wasn't long, just a few paragraphs all carefully worded. She wrote that she regretted what she'd said, that she was under pressure, that she missed our closeness and hoped I'd consider forgiving her. There was no mention of the party or the post she made in the community group, no acknowledgement of what she'd taken or what she'd let people believe. I closed the email and set the phone aside. There was still flour on my forearm from that morning's test batch. That afternoon, Beverly stopped by the empty shop to drop off a few curtain swatches she'd picked up. She ran her hand along the counterframe and smiled. "It already feels like you," she said. I nodded, still thinking about the email, though I hadn't said anything to her about it yet. Word had started to spread again, but this time it felt different. A few folks from the old neighborhood stopped by the chain bakery, asking if I was really opening a shop again. They weren't cold or dismissive. They just seemed curious, like they weren't sure what side of the story to believe anymore. I'd bring in a few of the test batches, scones, biscuits, apple hand pies, and leave them in the break room. One morning, one of the delivery drivers pulled me aside and said, "That cinnamon roll. Better than the ones you made back at Sweet Heritage." I thanked him and went back to work, but that stayed with me for the rest of the day. Nina helped me paint the front windows on a Sunday. Pale blue trim. She added small fairy lights along the inside just under the ledge. The first time we turned them on, the whole place felt warmer, like it was almost ready to be mine. I didn't respond to Pamela's message. I didn't need to. Later that week, Marcus brought over a refurbished display case someone he knew was selling. We moved it into place just under the front window. I covered it with a sheet, knowing I'd fill it soon enough. Some days I'd drive past the gas station on Fairview. Pamela's car was usually parked near the employee entrance. I never stopped, never went in. I figured she was still working the late shifts, still scanning groceries under the glow of a humming fluorescent light. One night I sat at the new counter with a pad of labels and started writing out a name. My name. Claire's Bake Shop. Simple, clean, handwritten in marker. I taped it to the front window with 2 pieces of clear tape. It was starting again, from the ground up, this time on my own terms. The final week before opening day was a blur of late nights and early mornings. The new oven had been installed. The signage was painted, and I spent every spare minute prepping dough testing fillings and adjusting prices on the printed menus. I had a rhythm again, simple, steady mine. One morning I was adjusting the chalkboard specials by the window when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another supplier confirmation, but the subject line caught my eye. "I'm sorry again." It was Pamela. Another message. Not a reply to anything I'd written because I hadn't written back, but a new one. She wrote that things were hard, that she shouldn't have posted what she did in the community group, that she missed me, and she hoped in time I'd understand why she acted the way she did. She didn't mention our parents. She didn't ask how I was or if the shop had opened. She just said she hoped I was well and signed her name like we were old pen pals. I read it twice, then slid my phone into the drawer behind the register and kept working. That same afternoon, Beverly stopped by with a small box of hand-picked tea towels she'd found at a weekend craft fair. She helped me unpack mugs and wipe down the display case. We were laughing about something Marcus had said the day before, some joke about running a bakery being the most physically demanding desk job in town, when I told her about the email. She paused mid-fold, looked at me for a long second, then just nodded and said, "You don't owe her a response." We went back to folding napkins and organizing the back shelf. Over the next week, the tone around me started to shift. Not just in the shop, but in the city. The whispers that once followed me into stores or echoed behind break room doors had gone quiet. Now, when I bumped into someone from my old neighborhood, they asked how the new place was coming along, or if I'd still be making those chocolate almond scones from Sweet Heritage. At the bakery, regulars from my past life began to trickle back, some cautiously, some with genuine excitement. One woman, a retired teacher named Mrs. Denton, who used to order a dozen scones every Saturday for her bridge club, stopped by with a vase of daffodils and said, "Took me a while to figure out the truth, but I'm glad you're back." I thanked her and placed the flowers in the front window. Not everyone said something. Some folks just lingered longer at the counter, placed their orders with quiet smiles, and dropped $1 into the tip jar without a word. I didn't ask for their approval, but I noticed when the air changed. There was a brief moment late one evening when I considered replying to Pamela. I sat at the prep counter, the room dim with only the task light glowing above me. I read her message one more time. Then I closed the tab and shut the laptop. Instead, I focused on the shop, on the opening, on the fact that the shelves were nearly stocked, the signage hung straight, and the new logo on the to-go cups looked exactly how I'd pictured it. By the end of the week, flyers had started to circulate. I'd posted about the opening on a local events board and brought a box of sample pastries to the morning shift at my old bakery job. Marcus passed them around and gave me a quiet nod that said more than words needed to. On Friday afternoon, as I was sweeping the front walkway, a car I didn't recognize slowed down in front of the shop. I looked up just in time to see Pamela in the passenger seat. Her window didn't roll down. She didn't wave. The car didn't stop. But I knew she saw me standing there with the broom in hand and the shop sign behind me. That night, I added a final note to the menu board in soft chalk, Claire's Bake Shop. Opening Monday at 7 a.m. Simple. Understated. Enough. The morning of the grand opening, I woke before my alarm. Nina arrived just after 6 with a bouquet of sunflowers and a thermos of coffee. We unlocked the front door together, turned on the lights, and watched as the first few customers began to gather outside familiar faces, a few new ones, and someone holding a folded newspaper under their arm like they were heading to church. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, dressed in an apron I hadn't seen before, carrying a tray of still-warm blueberry muffins he'd baked at home. "Figured you could use an extra hand this morning," he said, sliding behind the counter. The bell above the door jingled once, then again. By 7, the line reached the sidewalk, and I was ready. By the end of the first week, Claire's Bake Shop was already starting to feel lived in. The morning rush came like clockwork coffee croissants, familiar greetings from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Some customers stayed to talk, others took their pastries to go, but nearly everyone returned. The shelves were rarely full by noon. I'd bring out extra trays restocked quickly and catch Marcus's glance as we passed behind the counter, both of us moving like we'd done this for years. That Friday, Beverly came by before closing with a small bundle of fresh daisies and a card. Inside was a handwritten note that simply read, "You did this. Not for them. For you." I taped the card to the wall behind the register. Word about the shop had reached the edges of the neighborhood and beyond. Local bloggers posted photos of our cinnamon rolls. A man from the community radio station dropped in to ask if I'd be open to a short interview. It wasn't overwhelming, just steady, like the whole city had been waiting for me to step back into myself. Every now and then someone asked how my family was. I never gave details, just said, "We're not close," and left it at that. Most people didn't press. Then one afternoon, just after the lunch crowd had tapered off, a familiar face appeared across the counter. Mrs. Halloway, my parents' old next-door neighbor, placed a hand on the glass and leaned forward like she wasn't sure how to begin. "I drove past their apartment complex last week," she said quietly. "Saw your dad out front trying to fix a rusted lawn chair. He didn't look well." I nodded once, then turned to pack her order. She didn't say anything else, and I didn't offer more. But that image stuck with me. Dad crouched near cracked concrete trying to patch together what was left of his pride with a bent screwdriver. Over the next few weeks, I heard small pieces of their life in passing. My mother had stopped attending her bridge group and left the neighborhood association without a word. Pamela was still at the gas station working closing shifts and scanning receipts with the same detached smile she used to give me at dinner. No one mentioned the foreclosure anymore. That part had faded. What remained was the slow, private unraveling of a family that used to measure success by appearances, now living with none. The strange thing was, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt done. Like a chapter had closed without my needing to slam it shut. That winter, during one of the first cold snaps, Marcus brought in a small space heater for the prep room. He'd been watching me work in fingerless gloves all week, and finally muttered, "This place needs a heating upgrade." I laughed and told him I'd budget for it in the spring. That same evening, just before locking up, I got a text from Nina. She'd driven past the apartment complex and seen Pamela sitting out front alone, her head in her hands. I read the message, stared at the gray screen for a moment, and put the phone down. We were no longer entangled. No more wires connecting my choices to their consequences. That night I sat at the back counter folding paper menus for the new holiday set, the soft clink of dishes drying in the background, the faint scent of nutmeg from tomorrow's batch. I glanced at the taped card Beverly gave me weeks ago and reread the words, "Not for them, for you." She was right. Every early morning, every tired muscle, every new customer, it was mine, built from the quiet ashes of what I left behind. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need apologies. I just needed to live like I was allowed to begin again. 6 months after opening the bakery had settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I was craving. The morning started early, always with the scent of warm cinnamon and melted butter rising before the first light hit the windows. By 7, we had regulars waiting teachers on their way to school, an older couple who split a raspberry tart, and a retired mechanic who brought a newspaper but rarely read it. They came for the pastries, yes, but they stayed for something gentler, something that had started growing quietly in that space, a kind of peace. I had everything I needed. A shop with my name on the sign, a team that worked beside me without drama or expectations, and friendships that ran deeper than convenience. Nina still came by every Saturday to help with inventory or hang a new wreath in the window. Marcus had become a kind of constant, never loud, never pushy, just present in all the right ways. And Beverly, who saw the cracks before I did, stopped by once a week with fresh flowers or something funny she'd heard at the school where she worked. I didn't hear much about my parents anymore. A neighbor mentioned once that my dad was taking odd jobs, fixing fences, patching driveways for cash. My mom, once the center of every community event, had stopped showing up to anything that required a smile. Pamela tried to restart her online boutique, but without the money or internet to keep it going, it faded into the background. I heard she still worked evenings at the gas station, where the lights always buzzed and the coffee never tasted right. There was no big apology, no dramatic reunion, just distance, and that was enough. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about the early years, those first few mornings at Sweet Heritage, before I ever handed over $1 to save someone else's home. I remembered the joy I used to feel watching the sunrise through the storefront window as the first loaf cooled on the rack. I thought I'd lost that version of myself, but she had only been waiting buried under too many compromises. Now I moved through the bakery with ease. My hands found the right measuring cups without thinking. My voice softened when a customer lingered too long at the counter. I smiled, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I was home in my own life again. Looking back, it wasn't the loss of money that changed me. It wasn't even the betrayal at the birthday party. It was the moment I realized that no one, not even family, has the right to define your worth by what you give them. I'd spent years tying my value to sacrifice, but real love doesn't ask you to disappear so someone else can shine. The day I walked away, I didn't know what would come next. I only knew that I was tired of holding up everyone else's world while mine quietly crumbled. Choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. And now, months later, I finally understood that boundaries aren't a wall between you and others. They're the doorway back to yourself. If you've been carrying someone else's weight for too long, if you've forgotten the sound of your own peace, I hope you'll remember this. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to rest. And when you're ready, you're allowed to build something new with your name on it and your heart still intact. Thanks for listening to my story. If any part of it stayed with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever had to walk away to reclaim your peace, just know you're not alone.